We're always looking for speakers for Dialog. If you'd like to do a presentation, please reach out to us at meetup.com/TechValleyNetUserGroup. Looking for other user groups to attend? Please visit meetup.com/.net-virtual-user-group.
Is based out of Albany. I also live in upstate New York, just down the thruway in the Rochester, Syracuse region. I'm a lead software engineer at FileOnQ. We're headquartered out in Seattle. We're a very small company, about 30 of us total, about 3 or 4 developers, if I count everyone correctly. And we work in the public sector, and a lot of the stuff that you'll hear me talk about, and it's applicable to this talk, is we have to take bleeding edge stuff, whether it's Uno platforms, Xamarin Forms, or other technologies, and integrate it with legacy systems like .NET Framework, WCF services, for example. And we'll talk a little bit more about how that kind of plays into some of our decisions with Uno platform. I'm working on my first technical book, which is going to be getting started on Uno platform, and that's going to get released later this year. I'm a Microsoft MVP, and I'm also an open source developer, and for my background in open source has to do a lot with the mobile and app dev spaces. I've contributed to Xamarin Forms, .NET MAUI, and Uno platform. So I've seen kind of, not all of them, but I've seen enough of the different .NET mobile toolkits to have a pretty decent opinion on, well, at least what I like. So let's go into my next slide there. So I always like to talk a little bit about expectations before I get too far into my presentation. So my target audience is anyone that's in this room, primarily .NET mobile developers, application developers. If you're a web developer, you're still in the right place here. Some of the stuff might be a little new to you when we get into the coding demo, but I'll go slow. And if you got questions, let me know along the way when we get into that part and give an answer. At the end of this talk, I don't expect anyone to be able to go and completely recreate what I've shown off. I kind of want to give you a little touch into Uno platform, why I like it, why we're choosing it at my company for some of our new products that we're working on this year, and we'll go over that. The other thing is that we're going to go over a little bit towards the end of this session is the differences between something like Xamarin Forms, .NET MAUI. There's a lot of choices we have right now in the .NET app space, and it can be very overwhelming if you haven't used all of them to make an educated decision. And I want to go over why you might choose one over the other. And before we get to that, I will tell you that pick whatever technology works for you and your team. It doesn't matter if I say you should use Uno platform because I think it's the best. I don't necessarily think anyone is the best. I think you find what works best for you and your team, and where your team's skill sets are. So let's talk a little bit about what Uno platform is. We've been talking about saying that there's a lot of .NET cross-platform toolkits out there. This is another cross-platform toolkit for .NET developers. The thing that really caught my eye with this when I first started looking at Uno platform is its list of supported platforms. On my list here, there's UWP, WinUI, WebAssembly, Mac, WPF, Linux, Android, iOS. It supports Tizen as well, and some others. The two that kind of jump out at me from that list is WPF and Linux. And the WPF one really jumps out for me, my company. I mentioned at the beginning, we do a lot of work in the public sector. So that means we have government contracts, we deal with police departments, fire departments, and loading stuff onto their systems. If you've ever worked in the public sector, you'll know that they are very slow to upgrade their servers. They're very slow to upgrade their client computers. And they still might be using operating systems like Windows 7. I know Windows 11 was just released this past October, but they're still there on those older systems. So being able to compile Uno platform in WPF, I can now deliver that on a Windows 7 machine and meet the customer where they are. So having all of these different platforms allows you to really meet your customers where they are. The Uno platform is built on top of the UWP and WinUI toolkit. So when the Uno platform team first went out to go and build this many years ago, we didn't have WinUI 3, which is stuff we're going to show you today. They had the UWP spec, and they looked at it and said, "Hey, this is really good. It's got everything we need to build applications. Let's take that and re-implement it for all of our platforms. So for web, Mac, Linux, Android, iOS, and so now they had this implementation across those. And when WinUI 3 stuff started coming out, the namespace has just changed slightly. So it's really the same. It's a very similar implementation. The important thing with when you're deciding what cross-platform toolkit you want to use is, are you using a drawn UI, something like Flutter that's using Skia to draw as controls. Uno platform is 100% native, except for two platforms, and I'll go over what those two platforms are. It's WPF and Linux, and we'll go over how that works in a little bit. And then the last bit to what it is when you use something like Xamarin Forms, one of the biggest headaches I've had in the past was I built something for iOS and it doesn't look the same on Android or vice versa. And I spent all this time putting these verbose XAML to get stuff to compile to look just the same way. Uno platform allows you to build pixel perfect UIs across all the platforms. I want to have like a tab bar at the bottom, couple with some icons and text on the screen. I go and deploy that across all the platforms. It's going to look 100% identical. There's always some minor differences where you might need to adjust spacing on an iPhone or an Android to take into account that notch at the top. But the pixel perfect across the platforms is very well implemented. So that's kind of a segue into my next slide here about what is Uno platform designed for. It's designed for your line of business applications. Talking a little bit about what you would use when you would use one of the toolkits over something else. I wouldn't necessarily use Uno platform to host a blog, for example. The WebAssembly stuff, the first page paint is a little bit slower. And you'll see that in the demo, and that's okay. That's a little bit slower, but line of business is their target audience here. So you have an application that you want to look perfect across all your platforms. Typically in the line of business, when I used to do a lot of work in various large enterprises, and constantly when I was using Xamarin Forms, they would tell me, well, we want this iOS app and Android app to look pixel perfect. It needs to be exactly the same. And we would have conversations about, well, it doesn't really, the design patterns for iOS is completely different than Android. And we'd have debates about it. And usually it would end with, well, it's a line of business app. It needs to look identical. So our people using it are familiar with it on whichever platform they're on. And it's Uno platform really shines with that pixel perfect UIs. With it being designed for line of business apps, you have so many applications out there that have been written in WPF or UWP that have only been targeting Windows. And now customers are asking for a web target. So I built this app, it's been running for years, and the customer said, well, we really need to run on a web browser because we don't want to install the executable on any of our machines at our office anymore. With Uno platform, you can now just compile it under WebAssembly, and you'll be able to get that and host that. And it works. It provides this migration strategy for anyone building Windows app to move to the cross-platform world with very little headaches. One of the case studies I've seen this past year that the Uno platform team put out was they were able to provide migration strategies for people that were still using Silverlight. I know it's been away for a very long time, but they were able to take a lot of that code and migrate it over to Uno platform, and things still worked. So the architecture of Uno platform is it's a similar value proposition to tools like Xamarin Forms or .NET MAUI, where you have your shared code in your native code, but the way it's actually implemented is a little different. This architecture diagram I pulled straight from the Uno platform docs. If you've seen any of their presentations, it should look familiar, but I'm assuming everyone here is new to Uno platform. So we're going to go through each of these platforms. So first off, this middle section here is the Uno. Is my cursor showing up on the? I'm going to assume it is. So this middle section here with the Uno platform logo.
Yes, it is.
Okay, big purple one. You can't miss it. Part of the Big Mouse gang. Okay, I digress. So the Uno platform logo here, and this is the WinUI logo here. This is where you're accessing the Microsoft.star UI toolkit and all those APIs there. And then you got your code under the C# plus XAML and .NET. And what's happening here is on the left for the blue column, you got the WinUI 3 toolkit. That's built by Microsoft. So when you use that, you're using the Microsoft tools, and however all that stuff works is how stuff is going to render. When you go to the red one, this is the WebAssembly section. So now you're using the Uno platform API. It's the exact same one. It's the exact same API structure. The only difference is instead of downloading the Microsoft DLL, you download the Uno platform DLL, and it implements HTML5 controls and puts them right into the DOM for you. And it's really nifty how some of that stuff works. And we'll go over some native API access for JavaScript in the demo. When you start working with AppKit or UIKit, because you want to build an iOS or macOS application, the shared code that you'd be working, let's say you're working on like a simple page, you'll be able to access those native views right there as if it's part of the object. And the Android one is the same way. It's the way I describe it to people, the differences from something like Xamarin Forms, because I look at this from a Xamarin Forms perspective since I spent a lot of time there. In Xamarin Forms, you had to build these large abstractions. So, and I know stuff is changing in .NET MAUI, but from the Xamarin Forms perspective, I might have a custom renderer for Android and a custom renderer for iOS, and I might have an abstraction on top of that that's used in my shared code. Uno platform doesn't have those types of concepts at all. If I have a page control and I want to access the native bits to it, if I'm in iOS, I can just go and access the native bits. If I'm in Android, I can go and get the context. All of my Android APIs are hanging right off that Microsoft.star control that you're using at that point. The Skia one for Linux is a little different. So up until this point, we've been talking all about native controls. For Skia, you have a drawn UI, and this implementation is used in both Linux and for WPF. So let's look at what the project structure might look like for a new platform project. So this is a screenshot from my getting started sample code that we're going to be going through a little bit later in this talk. And so there's a couple things here that might be different if you're a Xamarin Forms developer. The first thing that's really different is you have a whole lot more project heads. So let's go through a couple of these and talk about what they do. So with the latest and greatest code available from .NET MAUI, we have tooling in Visual Studio 2022 that allows me to have one mobile project that could support iOS, Android, macOS, and that's what that mobile target is up there. Earlier last year, you had to break those out between Android, iOS, and macOS, but now we're able to include them all in one. The Skia projects, those are your drawn UIs, or the GTK one and the WPF one there. Those ones are a little bit different. Like I was just saying a couple minutes ago, it's drawn UI as opposed to native controls. Those ones are easy to work in because you don't really have, if it works in one, you really don't have to worry about working in the others because it's just going to work because it is a drawn UI. With with the GTK project, one of the cool things you can do with that is you can deploy that to a Windows machine, a Linux machine, a Mac machine, because the GTK toolkit is cross-platform itself. With WPF, if you want to run the WPF application, you have these two projects. Looks a little confusing at first, but your WPF code, if you need to add anything special, we'll go in this WPF project here. If you want to run it, you use the WPF.host project. The next one on the list is our WebAssembly, WASM for short. And that's just an ASP.NET Core project. And that'll load up our UNO stuff and load it right into the website when you launch it. So when you open that one up, if you've done any ASP.NET Core development, it'll look very familiar. It's got your www root folder and your scripts and CSS files that you can all add in. And then the last target head is your Windows one. This one is using the WinUI or WinApp SDK and the packaging components with the latest and greatest templates that are available from Microsoft. So out of all of these, the Windows one is going to be the one that you're going to do the majority of your development in, and then when you need to go and test it on the other platforms, you'll load up the other ones. And that's the recommendation that I've gotten from the UNO platform team. It's the tooling is much easier to use straight from Windows. And the last project here is your shared project. And it's if you haven't seen a shared project before, the best way to describe it is it's like a series of code files that get referenced from any CS proj, and it'll be compiled as if those code files were included in that CS proj. The differences from that to like a portable class library or any .NET standard project is those solutions will compile a DLL binary that then gets referenced. The shared code does not compile on its own. And the nice thing about this in UNO platform is when I need to go swap between shared code and native code, it's really easy to do a preprocessor directive and to say, hey, I want to do iOS stuff right here. Let me go and do it. And you don't need to do any special additions to a CS proj file. It's just those directives are included in each one of your target heads. So I've been talking a lot about UNO platform is all about native controls. So the structure of how all this is put together, and this is again the WinUI specification originally built by Microsoft. They just implemented it for their platforms. Is everything's at the top root interface is your iframework element, and as you start going down the class hierarchy, you eventually get to, say, a text block, which would render simple text on the screen, similar to like a label. But in between that one and the iframework element, you will have native controls. So and it's not a renderer per se that you need to go through an abstraction layer and write a bunch of code in one of the target heads. It's literally right there on the object itself, and they're able to use this class hierarchy to make it really easy to swap between your shared code and your native code. So let's take a look at what that might look like. This is a screenshot from accessing some native bits on a main page. So we are in the shared project at this point, and we're not doing anything all that useful. I just wanted to document and show how you could be in your constructor of the main page and access iOS bits or Android bits. In the iOS section, we're accessing the UI kit. And in the Android section, we're accessing the Android context. And both of them on the right side of the equal sign here are doing this based off of the main page. I'm not going through any additional application structure to get these objects. This was the part that really caught my, oops, let me see my Windows key, start menu. This was the part that really caught my eye when I was starting to do some research on UNO platform a few years ago. Is like at first it looked like there was a lot of magic in how this stuff worked, and then when I was looking at the implementation details, it became very clear that I'm able to have my shared code, and then if I start diving into the class hierarchy, I'll eventually get to my Android bits, or I'll eventually get to my iOS bits. And this is where that shared project really comes to help us out, because that code gets compiled as if it was part of that project. So the next slide is demo time. So let's go and open up Visual Studio, and we're going to go and look at some of the features of Uno Platform. And I had to minimize the chat for a minute. Is there any questions? Don't see any in the chat yet. All right, so let me open up Visual Studio. And so this is just a Uno Platform project that I put together. It's using a slight modification to the standard template. One of the things that I've learned with Uno Platform is things do move very fast, and the documentation doesn't always stay up to date. So the best thing to do when you run into problems is post an issue on GitHub. But this template is slightly modified. I'll comment on the meetup afterwards with a link to everything, so you can go and download it yourself. So what we'll do first is we will go through and run each one of these projects. I'm just going to set the Windows project as my startup project, and let's go and launch that. If we look at our code here, this is what comes in the standard template. It's just going to say hello world. So let's go and launch that. And we'll just write over the app that was already there, because that was stuff I was doing earlier today. And when this loads up, this is, again, going to be using our WinUI 3 code. So we have a full Windows application here, and that's expected. It's nothing different than what Microsoft gives us. So let's go and start playing with the actual Uno Platform bits. We go and launch the WebAssembly one. And this is going to take this same exact code and load it up in a browser. So we got the Uno Platform logo. It's got a little loading indicator here at the bottom. It takes a little bit to load up. I am running it in debug mode. When you load it in release, it does go a little bit faster. If you do AOT compilation, it goes a little bit faster. But that's one of the things I mentioned earlier about you might not use the WASM target for building a website, but you definitely use it for building a web application. All right, so the next one that I want to show is the WPF one. Over here, we just have the WPF host. And we'll launch that one. And we have a little console app that pops up, and then the actual application pops up. All this still looks the same. I know it's just a Hello World application, but we'll go into some customizations in just a couple minutes. And then the next one I wanted to show off is the Gtk project. So I mentioned earlier that we could do Linux. So that's what we're going to do. I'm going to load up WSL2. I have a special app I use called XLaunch that allows me to create an X server on Windows. I'm just going to click through a couple prompts here to get loaded. And then I have a full X server installed on one of my WSL2 instances. So I just come in here and say start XFCE4, and we have my desktop environment right here. So now if I go and launch this, it's the same application that we've been seeing. The fonts are slightly different for Linux, but everything is the same. This is running natively in a Linux environment. We can close that out, and let's go and look at our mobile targets now. I'm not going to be doing the iOS or Mac for this talk. I'm running a preview build, and it was not happy with my Mac Mini, so we're going to stick to Android. But there's a lot of cool targets here to see how things can build upon itself. So while it's going, what we're going to do in this demo is we're going to start by doing some basic interactions similar to sample apps that you might see in Xamarin Forms or .NET MAUI, and then we're going to get into writing some platform-specific code and a little bit of navigation code, just enough to kind of get your feet wet, show you what's going on with the tooling. And let's see what the always takes a while to deploy something to Android. So while we're waiting for that, is there any questions so far? I don't see anything in the chat. That's okay. Give it just a little bit longer to kick into gear before we move on. So while that's building and deploying, over here on the right, like we open up any one of these projects, there's not a whole lot of code in any one of them. They all just end up punting all of their business rules over to the shared code. So the shared code right here, this looks very familiar to what you might have done in your .NET Standard code. This is what they did is they took all the code that would have been inside your WinUI project and they moved it over here. So everything follows that WinUI style code, and it's all using the Microsoft.UI namespaces. If you're a UWP developer that has not used WinUI yet, it has transitioned from Windows dot to Microsoft dot, so it's really easy to kind of go back and forth. The NuGet packages are slightly different. That is taking a really long time to deploy. We'll talk a little bit more about a couple other things. The NuGet packages are slightly different for the Windows project to the other projects. On the Windows project, you don't need to include any of you include the core project for Uno, but nothing else. Like if you look at the WASM target, you start including several different Uno WinUI projects. If you're doing Uno platform for UWP, you do Uno.UI. I'm sorry that the Android one is not cooperating with us today. We're gonna have to skip that part of my demo, but that's okay. We'll try again in a little bit. I will just run one more build while we go through stuff. Okay, so what I want to do now is I want to go and update our page to have a button on it, and we're going to add some basic interaction. So we're going to build a counter on the page. So we're going to start by changing the background color here, and I'm going to select my Windows target to make sure I get all my, there we go, IntelliSense pops up. So we'll say a very specific number that I came up with earlier for our background. And so a grid control allows you to define a custom grid on the screen. We're just going to use it as a general container, and then we're going to put a stack panel inside of that, and that allows us to put order stuff vertically or horizontally on the screen. With what we're going to do today, we're going to put some text on the screen and a button underneath it. So the next thing I want to do is just make sure that stuff gets centered. So we can say vertical alignment is center, horizontal alignment is center. And then we'll just take this text box here and we'll stick it in there. Okay, looks like the Android build succeeded. I'm going to just try running it one more time and see if we have good luck. Yay! It's working. My demo is not failing. Okay. The Android one will look slightly different. The background will be different, and the text will be centered. But we'll at least be able to see our Uno platform. So all that is working. We can continue along with what we were working on. So I mentioned some of the tooling stuff is not always the best when working with Uno platform. So I'm just going to go and unload these projects because hot reload doesn't work that well, at least for me. I'm on a preview build over here, so yeah, buyer beware. But we're going to launch the Windows app right now, and so we can get some hot reload while we go through and implement a couple other things on our page. Once the window apps, we'll slide that over. So we have our fancy background here. So let's go and I forgot to ask, Chris, is this font big enough or do I need to zoom in? Let's zoom in like that.
It looks pretty good for me. I think you're fine.
Better? Okay. we'll leave it at that then. So let's go and make a couple changes to this text. Let's go and change the color to white because it will look much better. We can see it now. The font size, make that a little bit bigger. Actually, I like 30. And what we're going to say is click button to increment counter. And we need to make sure that we have some text wrapping with this. And we're going to say whole word. And the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add a button. So I can come in here and say button, and we'll say content. I'll have it say increment counter. And I'm just going to drop that on a new line. And that's created the button. And it's not centered, so we can go and fix that pretty easily with saying our horizontal alignment needs to be centered. And I want the size to be a little bit bigger, so we can say font size is 30. I want to add a little bit of padding because I'm particular with how these things look. That looks a little bit better. And I want to add some spacing to our stack panel. So we have a little bit of spacing between those. And then the last thing I want to do is I want to add some text alignment for the text block, and I want that text to be centered. That'll help us in a little bit. So now we have a label and a button on our screen, and let's go and add some click events and have this update as we click through it. So I'll start by adding my click to the button here, and we'll say click, and we'll say on increment counter. Now I need to stop the debugger for a bit while we go to our code behind. And on my code behind, I'm going to say void on increment counter. It needs an object and it needs a routed event args. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to create an object to store a count. And we'll say counter plus plus. And then we need to access that control that we created. I didn't give it a name, so I come over here and I'll say x name. And we'll call this our message. And to ensure that it shows up in the code behind, I'm going to do a quick build of the Windows project, and then we'll be able to access it and show everything is working. So I'll be able to say message. This is our text block object. And I can say text equals. And we head back to our main page. We'll copy the text from here. And I'll throw a $sign in front of it so I can plug in the variable, and we'll say count in counter. So now if we go and run the app, we'll be able to run this code and it will update that counter. And as I update the count, it increments. So that works. And if I go down to smaller size, everything looks pretty good. Let's go and make one more change before we try the other platforms out. This assets folder here allows you to include images. So I went ahead and downloaded this file from the GitHub repository. It's just added as a content object for its build. So what we're going to do is we're going to update the top here, and I'm going to say image. And I want to render this on the screen. We're going to say how many maps are supported. All of them.
No, how are maps supported?
How are maps supported? Oh, I thought you were talking about scaling size. They like Google Maps.
Google Maps, iOS Maps. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt what you're doing.
Yeah, let's talk about that at the end.
Okay.
Let's talk about that at the end. But did make me think about this. So one of the things that you'll notice that's really different from something like Xamarin Forms is there's an auto-scaling logic built right into Uno platform. I remember many times for Xamarin Forms projects, I would have to build out the various scaled sizes for UWP, iOS, and Android. They do a lot of that for you, so you don't need to worry about it. It goes back to that pixel perfect UI that I was talking at the beginning. So looking back at the code here, it should be as simple as saying assets/uno.ping, and drop on a new line, and we could just, I just want to make this have a width of 200 pixels, and we'll say margin 0. I want to be a little bit down from the top, so we'll do something like that. Let's see what that looks like. I always get my syntax here for the source mixed up. I think that's right. Okay, so that looks mostly right. We could probably update our vertical alignment to have it be top. There we go. That looks better. Why do we make that like 400? 300. And then we'll change this to like maybe 50. We'll make it 80. There we go. So now we have a logo. We have some text. We're able to increment our counters. So what does this look like on our various platforms? Let's go and reload all of those projects that I unloaded earlier. And we're going to do the WebAssembly project first. Not rename, we're going to set a startup. And everything that we've done so far is just going to work out of the box in WebAssembly. Takes a little second to load. Everything here is perfectly identical to what we did. We got our background colors are right, our text is right. If I go and increment our click counter, all of that works. It looks identical. If we go and run our next project in our list, our WPF project, the same thing's going to happen. Loads up, everything got a little bit taller. So we hard-coded some values, but everything is the same, and it all looks identical. The Linux one's always really cool for me to look at because we're bringing WinUI to Linux. So we'll head over to our X server window. Everything's still the same here. I can go and increment the counter, and it increments just like it did on all the other ones. And we'll do it for Android. And load that up. And the first time I saw all of this working together like we just did there, it was impressive to me just how easy it is, where I don't have to worry as much about how my application is going to look in the various platforms. I'm not spending my entire day hunting down the margins that I need to adjust ever so slightly on one versus the one platform versus the other. Oh, that was a relatively simple example. Let's talk a little bit about how we can expand upon this in some native code and some platform-specific code. So the first thing we're going to do to expand upon this is I'm going to go create another button here, and we're going to have this content say next page. So we're gonna create another page. We're going to make this centered just like we did. We'll do a font size of 30. And we'll do another padding of 35, and we'll have a click event for this, and we'll say on next page. So let's go and create a new page. I'll just come over to my shared project, and I'll say new item. And I'll let the templates spin, and we're going to say page, and got my code behind. Namespaces here are incorrect. They say Windows, and that's not what we're using. We're using Microsoft, so we're just going to blow all that away. We're going to let Visual Studio tell us what we want. We want Microsoft stuff, not Windows. So what we can do now is we can go and create our event listener that will navigate to the next page. We'll say void on next page, and we'll say object sender routed event args. And to navigate to the next page, we got to do a couple things. So if we look at our app XAML.cs, we have this window object that's private. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make this public to make our life a little bit easier. Navigation in WinUI is all done through a frame type object. So what I'm doing here is I'm making our parent window accessible from other parts of the application so we can perform navigation. If you're using some type of menuing control, or you might be including a frame on the page, you would be doing navigation through that. So now that gives us the ability to come over to our next page code, and we'll say var window. We're going to go and get our app.current. Visual Studio catches up to me. There we go. So we'll say app.current to get our current app, and we'll say .window. So that gives us the window object we just exposed from the app XAML.cs file. And now I want to see if our content is a frame so we can perform navigation operations on it. I'm going to say window.content. If it is a frame, we're going to call it our root frame. And now I can do my navigation. And the new Visual Studio IntelliSense stuff is telling us what we want to do. We're going to type it out though. We're going to say navigate, type of next page, and we're going to pass null for our parameters. So what this code is going to do is it's going to navigate to the next page for us and apply the default animation behavior. You could do a whole hour or two on navigation stuff. This is just kind of show you how you get started with it. Let's double check on the main page now. Set on next page for a click. Perfect. So what we'll do is I'm just going to copy our background color because we want everything to be the same on the next page. A background equals pound, and we're going to say just throw a text block on the screen. So text equal hello from next page. And we're going to start the Windows project just to do a little bit of testing, make sure all of those operations work. We're not going to go through all the platforms right now. We'll go through all the platforms in just a minute. And once this launches, we have our two buttons here. I can click next page, and it brings me to the next page. It's kind of hard to see up here at the top, especially since it's black. Text for the foreground, we're going to change that. So let's go and make that a little smaller, and we'll bring our Windows code over to the right. All right, so back over here on the main page, I'm just going to copy all of the properties we already defined. That looks pretty good, and then I want to put this in a stack panel. Stack panel or stack? Yes, it is a stack panel in this one. I still catch myself not knowing if it's a stack panel or stack layout. We're just going to copy everything over from that, and then we'll just close that, and we'll tab this over one. Okay. And it's only going to stop, so we're going to stop. So right now we have the same stuff that we were just doing, but what if we want to go and write platform-specific code? Instead of saying hello from next page, I want to say hello from Windows or whatever platform that we're on. In other toolkits, you start having to write a large amount of abstraction code. So we have these XML namespaces at the top of our page here. So what I can do is for Windows, I can go and grab this text from the main XML namespace, and I say XMLs when. Tell me to stop because I'm making changes you can't hot reload from. We're going to change that to when. We're going to say hello from Windows. So if I go and run this on Windows, nothing changes except the content of our text block. But once this loads, we'll go and try and running it on web and see what happens. So right now it still says hello from Windows, and that's to be expected. But if we go and run WebAssembly, nothing's going to show up on the screen. This is, I'll wait until it shows up on the screen. I'll wait for the application to pull up. We have our main page that we created. We click next page, it's blank. This was really intriguing to me. I was very used to doing platform-specific code in Xamarin Forms, and we coded our way into so many corners with that, whether it was an enterprise code or even the platform itself for creating markup extensions to make our lives easier. In Uno platform, it is literally as easy as just putting the name of the platform with a colon in front of whatever control you want to do. So let's go and do this for a couple of the platforms we're looking at today. So I said XML namespace. We want to do WebAssembly. We'll say WASM http://uno.ui/wasm. You have to include it in the ignorable, otherwise the tooling gets very angry at you. So we'll put that down here. What's our next platform? Skia. So we'll say XML namespace Skia equals http://uno.ui/skia. Same thing. We want to put that down here for ignorable, and then we're going to say XML namespace Android. We'll say http://uno.ui/android. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy this text block for all these platforms. So we have Skia, WASM, then Skia, then Android. And I can come over here and update this to say WASM. We'll just change this to hello from WebAssembly. We're going to update this to say Skia. Then the last one is going to be Android. Perfect. Now let's go and launch our Windows app. And now we'll go through and run through all the applications. It is yelling at me for, did I type something wrong? I mentioned earlier, I'm glad I did that. So we have a build error right now because it's trying to load this in our main Windows code and it doesn't like it. I mentioned earlier, whenever you create these XML namespace for the platform-specific code, always put it in the ignorable, except the Windows one. It gets angry and upset with you. So now it'll compile and run. And we go to our next page. It only says hello from Windows because all the other code is ignored from the view stack. It's not that it's hidden or anything. It is completely ignored because we prefixed it with the platform we want it to be included on. So now, if we go and run this across our platforms, we will be able to see the special content that we want included just in that platform. And this is really nice if you have some shared code that you want on that platform, but how can we expand this? Let's get through showing you all of these. I wish there was an easy way to show them all at once. I'm sure there is. We hit next page. Again, it says hello from Skia. We go and load up Linux. Mac server still running? Sure is. We hit next page. Again, hello from Skia. It doesn't show anything else there. And then we'll do Android. And I'll pull up my emulator and show everything that's going to be just going to say hello from Android. And this one is the slowest. There we go. Looks like it's getting there. All right. Perfect. The app launched. We'll hit next page. Hello from Android. Okay. So adding these shared controls that you can use in any of the platforms is useful. But what if I want to do something really native? Let's say I had a text view. And I said text hello from native Android text view. But we're not really going to add a whole bunch to this. If you're not familiar with the Android API, text view is what Google says is how you display text on the screen. The implementation details of a text block, for example, on Android would be a text view. So what we're doing here is we're adding the native control to our Android view stack right here in the XAML. There's no additional abstraction. So when we go and launch this now, it's going to show us that. No styling on it, so it's kind of difficult to see on the purplish blue background, but that's a native control right there. This became really handy to me and my team when we were deciding on whether or not we wanted to use Uno platform, because if there's native controls out there that we want to use, we just reference them and we can literally just inject them right into the view stack like this. So let's go and do a little bit more native code. I'm going to create a button here, and we're going to have a content that says display dialog. And I'm just going to copy over our styles from the other page. What I want to do with this button is when you click it, a dialog window pops up. So we'll say click on dialog. And we'll head over to our code behind here. And we'll say void, what do I call it, on dialog. And we'll say object sender, and we'll say routed event args. And I think I need to include a namespace at the top. So I don't want to do shared code here. I want to go 100% native. So I'm not doing this from memory. I do have the code handy. I'm not that smart to be able to do that. I know some people are, not me. So we're going to use the alert dialog of the Android API to display our dialog natively. So we're in our shared project here. I'm going to update this to say .NET 6-Android. And if Visual Studio cooperates with me, we should have our code showing up correctly. So we'll say, it looks like it's not cooperating with me at all. Try that again. Probably because I put a run there. Come on. Tooling is not always the best. I'm just going to close all my windows and reopen that and see if that makes it want to cooperate more. No, even less. Oh, wait, is it cooperating now? Kind of. Yes, it's cooperating. Okay, so we're going to create an alert dialog. And since this is shared code, when I add a using statement at the top, I got to make sure that's also in Android. Otherwise, we're going to get issues when we try building this for any platform that is not Android. So we'll just do a #if at the top for Android, and we're going to say I want to create my dialog builder, call it builder, and we'll say new alert dialog.builder. So in the slide deck, I said that we have access to the Android context. So I'm going to say this.context. This is our next page. If I hit F12 on this context, it's going to show us that we're inside an Android view from the next page. This is the part that really caught my eye with Uno platform of how do you get to the native controls? It's right there hanging off your shared control. There's really no difference between your native and your shared, except there's a little bit of code that sits in front of the native. So let's go and create a native view that we're going to put into our dialog. So we'll say text equals a new text view. We're going to use our Android widget for that. It's going to get added up here at the top at line 3. And we're going to, again, include this.context. And we'll say text equals hello from native dialog. And the next step is we're going to add this to our dialog builder. Also set view, text, and then I'm going to say alert dialog, our dialog equals builder dot create. And then we're going to show our dialogs. We'll say dialog.show. If I go and run this on the Android, we're now going to create a 100% native dialog and render it on the screen. So I hit display dialog. This is not using anything from WinUI at this point. We have now rendered a native control on the screen. So that's really cool that we can interop with however we want to with the native bits to the shared bits. So let's go and look at another example here. WebAssembly is a really compelling platform, especially for that line of business style application. So if I say else if, and we say has uno wasium, let's say I want to run a JavaScript library. I can invoke some arbitrary JavaScript code that I know is sitting there downloaded on the client machine. I can say uno.foundation.webassembly runtime.invoke JS. And we're just going to launch an alert statement, and we're going to say flow from, what did I say? Native JavaScript. And if I change my target here, it should highlight this code. Perfect. So now we can go and run it for Wasium. And when I click the, did I miss something? It's got squigglies. Nope, I guess that's just a tooling thing. I am using a preview build of 2022, so there be dragons around every corner. Next page, we hit, and it says hello from WebAssembly. If we hit display dialog, this just printed our alert from JavaScript. So you can use this to invoke any amounts of JavaScript that you want. You have a JavaScript library that does some processing for you, go right ahead. You can invoke the JS and do whatever you want with it. Let's stop that. Let's go look at one more example. So let's say elif has uno skia. So skia is the drawn UI. I want to update this to go to the WPF target now. And what we're going to say is we're going to grab the WinUI control, it's dialog, and we're going to say new content dialog. We're going to say dialog.content equals hello from Skia dialog. And we'll say dialog.showAsync. It doesn't have a sync method. It doesn't matter for purposes of this demo, so we're just going to leave that as is. And we're going to go and run our WPF application. And when we click the button, we'll have our dialog there. So I hit display dialog now. Hello from Skia dialog. Completely different from what we did on Android and WPF. We're still displaying a pop-up here. Let's take a look at that running on Linux now. I'll hang out here. We have our applications loaded. I'll hit next page. Display looks exactly the same as WPF. So I went over a bunch of different parts of Uno platform in the code demo here. As I said at the beginning, I don't expect anyone at this session to be able to take all this stuff back and say, we can do this right away. I wanted to give you a taste of some of the things that you can do with Uno platform. And so you can go home, go onto the Uno platform docs, download some sample code, and try getting your running yourself and poke around a little bit with it. So I did promise at the beginning, let me stop the screens and get back to where we were, that I would talk a little bit about when to use Uno platform versus something like Xamarin Forms. And there's no right or wrong tool to use for what you're building. I've said a few times, use what your team is most comfortable with. If you're a Windows app team and you want to build mobile apps, maybe Uno platform is the right choice for you because you're familiar with the UWP and WinUI spec, and that works for you. If you have a lot of experience with Xamarin Forms and you want to target web you want to target some of the other options that are available in Uno Platform, well, of course, Uno Platform is going to make more sense. But if you want to build an iOS and Android app, well, you can do that in Uno Platform. It might make more sense for you to use Xamarin Forms. So, find the tool that makes sense for what you're doing. There is no there's no one tool to rule them all. There's no best tool. This is a talk on Uno Platform. We made our decisions to use it on some of our new projects a couple of years ago at my company because Uno Platform doesn't just provide the Android targets, it provides the desktop target, it provides the web target, and those were critical for us. So I'm going to open it up to questions. I got my contact information there as well, and I will do my best to answer all of these. I know a lot about a lot of Uno Platform, but not everything.
If anyone would like to ask Andrew a question, you can unmute and ask now.
Could be about something that we just saw or something completely different about Uno Platform. So everyone knows 100% they can go and build this now. That's a joke I always make. But Chris, you were asking about how maps are supported. So we'll start there. So truthful answer, I don't know, but I believe I saw some maps projects built into the Uno Platform itself. I have not played with the map support, so I don't have a whole lot to answer. I believe somebody from the Uno Platform team was supposed to be attending here. I don't know if they actually made it or not. Maybe they could speak on it, but I don't have a good answer for you.
I think there is a map control that you can use.
I believe I've seen it, but I haven't used it, so I really can't speak to it.
Yeah, I'm looking at the docs online. It currently supports iOS and Android, so if you're using the map control, you wouldn't be able to use it on every platform.
Yeah, you would probably. So the path I'd be heading down on that one is use that for iOS and Android. I would use whatever is available for WinUI and the Windows target. Skia, you might run into some problems. WebAssembly, you could hook into a JavaScript library if you wanted to. So that problem of native code and some of the abstraction side of stuff doesn't go away. They really pivoted how you access your native bits from what I was familiar with in the Xamarin Forms world.
How does it work with Figma?
So that's another good question. I don't have an answer for. I have not used that yet. They just announced that last month. So last month they made a bunch of huge announcements. They came up with a new application model called MVUX, I believe is what it's called. I don't remember exactly if it was that or something different. They come up with the Uno Platform toolkit. They're able to export pages from Figma, which I saw a demo on it and it looked really cool. I have not seen anything outside the demo. They just had all of their announcements first week of December. So a lot of that stuff is very new.
Can you go back to where you were doing the page navigation? How would you inject data into the page that you navigated to?
That's a great question. So if we look at the main page here, so we look at the structure of the navigate. It shows my IntelliSense. Let's try one more time. Well, Visual Studio is very angry with me, but here's how it would work. So the first parameter there says type of next page. That's the page you want to load. The next parameter there is an object called parameters. We're passing null because we don't want to pass any data. If you want to pass data to a page, you could pass any object there. And then downstream in the implementation of the code behind of the next page is an event handler that lets you, there we go, this parameter object here. So downstream on the next page, you could implement an event handler that would be able to get that data and you'd be able to do something with it. And then the third parameter that you see here, this navigation transition info, allows you to define what type of transition that you want to do from one page to the next. And then the event handler for that, if IntelliSense shows up, I could probably find it. Let's go to methods. Don't remember off the top of my head what the method is, but there is a method here that does it. It's an on something. Maybe this has like navigate in the name. On navigated. So I believe it is on navigated. These two, and then the E object would have our parameter on it. Yep, right here. So this would then be the payload, and you can do whatever you want with it. So again, you would start over here, and you would plug in like a string, say, you know, hello from main, and then over here you would say, you know, your secret message, and just cast it as a string. And you'd have that message right there. All right. Any other questions?
All right. Does anyone else have any questions?
Did I throw anyone for a loop? Like, is this more complicated than I think? Is this seem simple to use?
Yeah, this looks pretty cool. I like how you can directly reference platform-specific stuff like you did with the Android.
Yeah, that was the part that really caught my eye with this stuff. Like going back over, like right here, where if we swap over to Android, I have the context, you know, Visual Studio, preview bits. Well, I have the context right there, and that's really cool. So when you look into these object structures, it's an Android object. It's a UI object on iOS. So you have anything that's available. One of my, you know, as over engineers as we all tend to be, you know, the abstractions and custom renders of Xamarin Forms, you know, everything is in its place. That's great, but it's a lot of code you have to maintain. It's a lot of code you have to write just to get some native object. In Uno platform, everything's on the object. You don't have to create any additional abstractions, so you just get it. If there's a special property that you want to access and make a change to, you know, one of the common things that I find myself creating custom renders for in Android is I want to make a custom button that does all sorts of special styling. On Uno platform, I don't need to do that. I can literally just go grab those native properties that might not be implemented in the template and update them. So it gives you a lot of power with that. The other part that I mentioned during the presentation is coming over here and being able to drop in any native control. That's so useful, and it's just added to the view stack. To do that in something like Xamarin Forms, you would have to create at least 3 classes that were 100+ lines of code. Here I did it in 4. 1 technically. I could put everything on 1 line. But I could ramble on about this stuff for hours, I think.
Okay, last call for questions before we wrap up. All right, I think we're probably done with questions. It was a really cool presentation. Thank you, Andrew.
No problem. Thanks for inviting me.
Let's see if there's anything left in the chat. No? All right, I'm going to turn off recording.